Did you know that mastering Linux can skyrocket your cybersecurity career? That's right. And in this video, I'm going to teach you 13 basic Linux commands that will set you on the path to success. Linux is the backbone of many cybersecurity tools and systems. That makes it a must-know for professionals in the field. Before we can start into these 13 commands that I have for you, there's something about Linux you need to understand. And at the end, I'm going to give you a few resources that you can practice further. Ready? Let's dive in. Anytime you run a command, you can add flags. Flags are basically a way to set options and pass in arguments to the commands that you run. The command's behavior will change based on what flags, if any, you add. Think of it like this. I can tell you to get the mail. You'll probably walk out to the mailbox, grab the mail, and walk back, right? Now, what if I tell you to get the mail and run? Or I could say to run to the mailbox, grab the mail, and skip back. These are all different flags that I can add onto the command, right? Enough about crazy mailbox trips. Let's talk about some Linux commands. Let's start with the pwd command. pwd stands for print working directory, and it basically prints the working directory path starting from the root location. So I'm in home/zenithcats. And there aren't many flags for pwd. I can do a pwd-l, and that will print any symbolic path, symbolic links if they exist. They don't in this case. Or I could do a pwd-p, and that will print the actual path if, again, I'm in a location of a symbolic link. Printwd prints the working directory and tells you where you are. So now, if I'm in the desktop directory, I can do a pwd, and now I'm in home zenithcats desktop. Okay, you just saw me do this, but the next command is ls. ls is by far one of the most commonly used Linux commands. It will display a list of files and directories inside the directory or the location where you are. In a Windows environment, you probably call these folders and files. In Linux, we call them files and directories, okay? So ls tells me everything inside of this directory. I can do ls-a, and that's going to show me everything inside of this directory, including hidden files that have a dot or a dot in front of them. I can do an ls-d, and that's going to show hidden directories. As you can see, this little period directory, that's a hidden directory inside of this directory where I am. I could do an ls-l, and that's going to show me a long form. That's what L is, ls long. That's going to show me file permissions. So if there is a file inside of this directory, okay, so now there's a file inside of this directory. So if I do an ls-l, like we said, now I see everything inside of here with the read-write permissions. When it was created, I have the long version. Okay, and finally we have ls-t that I can use to sort those by date and time. Next up is cd. cd stands for change directory. Okay, remember in Windows we call this a folder, so we're going to change folders, change directories. We can move around, we can start moving inside of the operating system. So remember, pwd is going to tell me where I am. I'm in home/zenithcats, and I can do an ls now. I want to see all of the directories in here, and I want to move to my desktop. I can change directory, cd into desktop. And a quick note here, Linux is case sensitive. When you're changing directories and putting file names, if they are capitalized, you need to follow that. So let's cd into the desktop. We'll do another ls and see what's inside of here. cd, where do you want to go? Change directory. Now I can do a cd/. That's going to take me to my root directory. Okay, pwd, I'm now in my root directory. I moved up from desktop. Let's cd back into my desktop. Okay, I'm in desktop. I want to go to my user's home directory. I could do a cd with the tilde, not the root directory, but my user's home directory. And if I do a pwd, I'm now in /home/zenithcats. And if I want to move up a directory, like hitting the back arrow in Windows, I can cd ... That will move me up a directory. Now I'm in home. cd is pretty straightforward. There are a few flags you can use. Okay, the next command is MKDIR, make directory. It will create a directory in the location that you are presently unless you specify somewhere else. This only works if the directory that you're trying to create does not exist. So I'm going to make directory testdir. All right, so I want to make a directory, and I'm going to make directory testdir. If I ls now, you can see my test directory that I just created. Again, this only works if that directory does not exist at that location. If I try to make directory again and do a test dir, it can't make it because it already exists. I can make a folder at a different location. It does not have to be only where I am. So for an example, if I wanted to make a directory inside of my downloads folder, I could make dir /home/zenithcats. And again, I'm going to make a test dir. Now if I cd to home/zenith. Okay, now we're going to talk about the touch command. Touch will create a file or change and modify a file's timestamps. Now, keeping in mind a hacker's mindset, that's going to be something you're going to want to store for later, because when you're moving through a system, you have access and you want to cover your tracks, you can use touch to change file stamps when they were last accessed, when it was opened, created, etc., to remain hidden. There's two basic ways to create files in Linux: cat and touch. And we're going to get to cat shortly, but it allows you to create files with content immediately. Touch, on the other hand, creates a file without any content. The file's empty, and you can always go back and edit it later. And the syntax is basically touch file1.txt, touch file name. If I do an ls, you see file1.txt is there. You can create multiple files. Touch file1.txt and file2.txt and file3.txt. And if I do an ls, all of those files I just created are there. If you want to change the access time, it's touch-a. If you want to check if the file exists or not, you can use touch-c. If it exists, it will ignore it. If it does not exist, it will create it. So file1.txt. And this basically is so that you don't get thrown back in error. That can be very useful if you're writing scripts and automating things. If you want to change the date that a file was created, it is touch-t year. So let's say 1993, month. I'm going to say December, DD 30, the hour, let's say 04, and the minutes will be 04, file 5.txt now. And now if I do an ls-l, this file I just created says it was created in 1993, just like I specified. Okay, number 6 is cat. So I mentioned cat a few moments ago, so let's take a look at this command. Cat is actually most commonly used to read the output of a file, if you want to see what's inside of it, but you can also create a file with cat. And the syntax is simply cat and the file you want to see. So inside of file1.txt, it says this is a test file. Now I can do something else with cat. If I just hit cat and enter, it is now listening for my input, and it will echo this to my output stream. My default output stream is going to be the screen, the prompt here. You see, I type it, I hit enter, and it repeated it back to me. If I pair this with a redirect operator, instead of coming back to the screen, I can send this to a file. So let's exit out of this with Control-C, clear my screen, and I can cat into a new file.txt. Now when I put in something, watch what happens. This is a new file, clear, and if I do an ls, we see my new file.txt, and let's see what's inside of it. Again, using cat, and as you can see, instead of redirecting what I did to the screen, my output became that file, and it put those lines that I typed into the file instead. Now, what if I want to edit this file using cat without overwriting what's there, as would normally happen? Instead of using one redirect symbol, I can use two, and it will now append the content to the bottom. Okay, so now this is an appended line. Control-C, and if I cat new file.txt, it appended that line instead of overwriting it. We're moving right along. Do you feel like you're becoming a Linux pro yet? You're making great progress. With just a few more Linux commands under your belt, you will become fluent. Don't worry. The next command we need to look at is cp, or copy, and it's pretty basic. To copy a file, I created that new file.txt, but I don't want it called that. I want to call it file6.txt, and I can do that. I simply copy the file I want to copy, and then what I want to copy it to. I want to copy this to file6.txt. Now, if I do an ls, new file.txt is still there, as well as file6.txt. Let's see what's inside of it. Did it actually copy? And it did. It copied that file to a new one. Okay, I can copy files between directories, and I'm going to use the exact path of that. So right here, I'm in ZenithCat's home. Okay, and if I want to copy this to my desktop, this is pretty simple. I simply cp new file, the exact path to the directory where I want to copy it to, and what do I want to name it. And when I do this, it is now there. So if I cd into my desktop, do an ls, you can see new file 3.txt is there. Now, what if you want to copy a directory, not necessarily just a file, but a whole directory and all the files inside of it? No problem. You simply add a -r or a recursive flag. So the syntax is cp -r. I want to copy everything on my desktop. Okay, next up is the move command, mv. Now suppose you don't want to just copy the files or directory, you actually want to move them. That's when you would use the mv command. I'm inside of my test directory, inside of downloads, but I don't want it here. I need to move this file up to just the downloads. I can use move. You can also use this to rename directories. I'll show you that in 1 second. I want to move testfile.txt to my downloads folder, up one. If I move up and do an ls, you now see that test file got moved up one directory. Like I said, you can use move also to rename files. Just like in Windows, you'd right-click, copy, rename. In Linux, it's simply mv. So I want to move testfile.txt to new testfile.txt. And testfile.txt is gone, new file.txt is present. If the file exists, move will overwrite it. You can use a move-i, mv-i, and that will confirm before you do it that you actually want to do it. You can use a -f to force it. Even if it exists, it will overwrite it. Or something that can be very useful is mv-b. That will create a backup of that existing file before overwriting it. All right, the powerful rm command, or remove. Now a heads up, bash does not have a trash bin folder like Windows has, or trash can like Mac has. When you delete something, it is gone. It will never be retrieved, unless of course you do some kind of recovery on the hard drive or something. It's not moved to the trash, it is completely obliterated. So, with a healthy dose of caution, let's talk about rm. Syntax is simply rm the file you want to delete. So I want to get rid of this new file.txt, and it's gone. If it's in a different directory, you simply rm the exact path to it like we talked about. You can use wildcards. Let's say I want to delete all of the txt files in here, but I don't want to delete anything else. So, for the sake of example, let's touch. Okay, I now have an image in here, and I want to remove everything that's a text file. I can simply rm wildcard everything .txt. If I do an ls, all of those txt files are gone, obliterated. Now, if you want to be safe, say this is in a script or some kind of output that you're interacting with, you just want to be cautious, you can use an interactive to rm-i anything.png, and it's going to say, okay, do you want to remove image.png? I'm going to put a Y for yes, enter, and it's gone. Now, deleting a directory is a little bit different than just deleting a file. If there's files in there, it won't work because the directory is not empty. You have to use a recursive flag. You have to use that rm-r recursive to tell it to remove the directory and everything inside of it. Another command is rmdir is remove directory. Either one will get the job done. Number 10, I want to talk about the head and the tail command. Two separate commands, but they go together, so we're going to talk about them together. These commands are probably used less than the ones we've already discussed, but they're still important to know. So let's start with head. Head will show you the first part of a file's contents, like when you cat it out, but it's limited. Cat prints the whole thing to your screen and leaves you there at the bottom, which can be a kind of a problem for big files. Head will only show you a portion of that. By default, it's going to show you the first 10 lines. So I'm inside of this folder. There's a bunch of directories. I'm inside of etc GIMP 2.0, and I want to look inside of this GIMP RC file. If I cat it, like I said, it printed everything out, dropped me down to the bottom, but I want to see what's at the top. So I can simply head GIMP RC. It shows me only the first 10 lines. I don't want to see the first 10 lines. Maybe I want to see the first 20 lines. I can do that. I can head -N followed by the number of lines you want to see, and it's GIMP RC. So now I have 20 lines instead of 10. Okay, now we're going to talk about tail. And tail is pretty much the exact opposite of head, so it shows you the bottom lines of a file. I'm going to look at this GIMP RC, and I'm just going to tail it out, and I have the last 20 lines. Now maybe I only want to see the last 5 lines. I can do a tail -N with the number 5, and it's going to show me the last 5 lines. Or I want to show everything after a specific line, I can do that. So I want to see everything after line 20. Okay, through the end of the file. Now there's something else you can do with tail that might be useful later on in other security related tasks. I can tail and watch your file as it's being edited. And here's an example. I have this file1.txt. I want to look at this file and I want to see if someone is editing it. So I would simply use the tail -F file1.txt. Now, I'm going to need a new terminal for this one, a new terminal window. I'm in the same directory, and I'm going to create a quick script. Okay, so I wrote a script. I'm going to show you what's inside of it. It's basically going to take the time, wait, add the next time, and it's going to keep doing this to this file. So if I execute this script, okay, we are tailing interactively, watching with that -F this file1.txt, and if I run this script now, what do we see? Just like the script is doing, it's adding that time every second, and we see it being live output with that tail. Next up is more and less. Now there might be times that you can view parts of a file, but you need something a little more interactive than just head and tail. That's when you can use more and less. Okay, so maybe you want to see the contents of a very, very long file, and you want to see them one portion at a time. Maybe it's some kind of code or the output of some nice hacking script. Okay, you can use more and less. Cat might not always do the job like you want it to. Okay, so this file, if I cat defaults.list, now what happens? I have to scroll up through this to read it. There's a better way. I can view this one section at a time. I'm simply going to less defaults.list, and it's going to show me this 53 lines of the document at a time. To go forward one line, I simply press the down arrow. To move the whole section, I can hit the space key, or I could use the B key. And if I want to move backwards a whole page, I use the D key, and that's going to take me up. If I want to move backwards simply one line, I simply hit the up key. Okay, so to go forward one line, I hit the down arrow, or I hit the space key. To go backwards a line, I hit the up key. To move forwards a whole page, I use the B key. To move backwards a whole page, I use the D key. I can throw in a -N if I want to see lines on those numbers. So for an example, I can do less with a -N, and it's going to show me, okay, you see it now. I have these line numbers, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Again, that can be very useful. The more command is very similar to less, but with a few noticeable differences. So again, if I put more defaults.list, you can see that it shows you the percentage of the file that you're at. That can be very useful. I'm jumping 15% at a time when I hit the space bar. And unlike less, I can view a certain number of lines at a time. So I could more dash 5 defaults, and I can go 5 lines at a time. And that's basically it for more. Pretty simple, right? With these 13 commands that we've gone over, you have learned a lot about Linux. So let's recap. We talked about PWD, print working directory. It shows you where you're at. We talked about the ls command. That's going to list everything inside of the directory where you are. You can see the files and folders. We talked about cd if you want to move directories. We talked about MKDIR, make directory, if you want to create a new directory or new folder. We talked about touch for creating files or modifying the timestamps of files. We talked about cat to look at what's inside of a file or using cat to create a file. We talked about CP to copy files, to copy directories. We talked about MV, you can move files, you can move directories. We talked about RM, the remove command. Remember, that's the one you want to be very, very careful with because there is no undo in Linux. We talked about head and tail, looking at the top of a file, looking at the bottom of a file, and we talked about more and less, different ways to view sections of a file and those slight differences between them. Now, I promised you I'd show you a way that you can get free lab time to practice learning Linux if you don't have access to an extra computer that you can install Linux on, or your computer doesn't have enough resources to run a virtual machine. Meet VULTR. VULTR is a cloud-based hosted server environment that I often use to run labs myself or to stand up servers for special instances during penetration tests, for an example. They literally have hundreds of operating system and resource combinations that you can choose from. For as little as $2.50 a month, you could stand up a private virtual lab and practice all kinds of things, including Linux commands. But today, you don't even have to pay. VULTR will give you $100 of free credit that you can use to start. That's enough to run up to 40 separate virtual machines. If you need a cloud-based virtual lab, check out the link down below so that you can start practicing Linux. And keep an eye out for my upcoming video on a completely mind-blowing way that you can grab a totally free Linux lab that no one is talking about. All right, you learned about a dozen Linux commands that you didn't know before. You should be proud. You now know more bash than most people, and we still have more to discuss. Next time, we'll take this a step further and we'll learn a few more complex commands that will turn you into a Linux hacking pro. But before you go, be sure and grab the basic bash cheat sheet in the description, and happy practicing. Oh, and bash that subscribe button on your way out. See you next time.